welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am here on March 17th speaking with someone in Ireland. We were actually just discussing the differences between how what St. Patrick's Day is here versus in Ireland itself. And you were saying, Sarah, that it's really more of a touristy holiday, or it's become more
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of it's definitely the show that we put on for the rest of the world as far as I kind of understand it. We recently made St. Bridget's Day at the beginning of spring on Imbolc a national holiday though, and there are much more interesting different local celebrations and community celebrations that have started to break out around that in terms of us celebrating our pagan history and things like that. So that to me is the most exciting festival of Irish history in spring is St. Bridget rather than St.
100%.
Patrick.
I have to now talk to you about this after we record.
Yeah,
But yeah, but we are here to talk about your book, Eat the
we
Ones
are.
You Love, which I think transcends all description. It is, it's like at first glance, you're like, oh, is this a retelling of Little Shop of
Little shop.
Horrors?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but it's a lot more than that. And it's just this crazy love story between two women and the carnivorous plant that comes between them and has come between one of them and her exes in the past. And it's wild. So tell us a little bit about Eat the Ones You Love and where it all came from.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. I guess Eat the Ones You Love comes from a life in retail. I worked in shops for many, many years, until I worked as a nanny and until I worked as a writer. And I found shop work deeply on one hand, fulfilling because you get to meet so many people and see the world from such an interesting vantage point, which is behind a counter. People treat you like you don't exist, which in some regards is kind of useful if you're a watcher. But also, it was at times a place where I found incredible friends and incredible community. So I knew for a long time that I had to take the decade that I spent from my mid-teens all the way through to my late 20s in shop work. I had to turn it into something. So if you kind of combine that deep-seated question, I guess, about how important shops and the life spent in working in shops is with I in 2019 I burned out quite seriously. I had a very kind of big left turn with my work and my health, and so I decided to stop writing, and I went and retrained as a commercial florist. And somewhere between the experience of working with flowers and this old wish, there was sort of a dovetail, and the story came from there.
Wow, that's really cool. I actually worked in bookstores before I decided to become a librarian.
I worked
And
in a bookstore too. Yeah.
yeah, it's really like I saw some of my best friendships and long-lasting relationships were
Yes.
really from that. Less so than even, I mean, I do have some friends from college and also from school, but really like that was like a formative time to cultivate relationships. But I thought it was interesting that this story is, you have now how does I know Neve is usually the
Nev.
Nev, but
Yeah.
it's Nev. She pronounces it
Mm.
Nev.
Hmm.
Is the proprietor of this flower shop where she
Hmm.
has this carnivorous plant that she calls
Baby.
baby.
Yeah.
And Shell or Michelle was the one who has stumbled upon it to become her helper. And I thought it was a really interesting way to kind of talk about just the interconnectedness of people who work in retail. So where did baby specifically come from?
So baby is part of a pantheon of creatures that I've worked on throughout the different novels I've written. I can tell you exactly where baby came from. Um, in my last novel, Other Words for Smoke, there was a creature at the heart of the story called Sweet James, and he was an owl made of wallpaper who lived in a wall in a house where generations of women lived. And he came from a place between the boundaries of realities, the sort of empty infrastructure, the corridors between worlds. And that is exactly the same space that baby comes from. Part of how Sweet James entered the world in the story of Other Words for Smoke is that he and another creature called Bobby moved into the reality that we have through a place where something terrible had happened, a site, a kind of a weak point in reality. And I used Other Words for Smoke to talk a lot about Ireland's very troubled history with women and the church and the Magdalen laundries and the various tragedies that had unfolded through those state-run organizations. So they moved into our reality through a weak point, a place where something bad had happened. And for baby, he equally moves into the Woodbine Crown Mall at a weak point. So that's literally what he is. If you want a technical descriptor of what kind of monster he is,
The
he's
very like
something.
cosmic horror in general, and I
Yeah,
love it
yeah,
because I feel like there's just so much to go from cosmic horror. It's so funny, like to for me, I my kids are always watching Gravity Falls, which I call baby's first cosmic horror because it is,
yeah. It's
it
Twin Peaks
does
for kids. Yeah.
it's exactly like I'm like this is 100 like everything about this is cosmic horror. But
I
that
would tell you, hand on my
yeah,
heart, that Other Words for Smoke is Gravity Falls fan fiction. Like that's what it is,
for real?
like 100%. Not for real, but on a spiritual level,
No, that's
like
awesome.
the
I
way
mean,
so many books have a sourdough starter, right? Where it's this thing that makes the book what it is, this weird
yes,
essence, and
yes, yes,
Gravity
yes.
Falls is the weird. Well, Twin Peaks and Gravity Falls are the weird essence
Which
of Other Words
Gravity
for Smoke.
Falls definitely comes a little bit from Twin Peaks. We actually
Mm-hmm.
had the pleasure of talking to Alex Hirsch about the Book of Bill over the summer.
Wow, that's
So,
fantastic.
yeah, no, that was fun, and we kind of realized that the voice he uses for Bill is very Lynchian, and we're like, how did we
Yeah.
not realize this? It's literally there. But getting back to Baby,
Mm.
and being cosmic horror in general, I love it, and I love just this idea of these just old entities that are able to come to us at these things that are just very mundane, like a mall and malls in general. You hear a lot about how they're changing or whether they're still going to be relevant. A lot of the malls in the States are
Empty.
either empty or they're like becoming other things, and it's really
Yeah.
crazy. And I love that there's, aside from this, there's also this love story in the middle of
Yeah.
it. You have both Nev and Shell who have experienced heartbreaks,
Hmm.
and there is a connection between the two of them, but there can be no
Yeah.
connection to Nev without baby.
Baby.
So
Yeah.
that story, I want to know where that came from because it is just wild and lovely.
Thank you. I think so Baby's the narrator of the novel, of most of the novel. And he, for me, as somebody who's written about monsters in the past, I really wanted to inhabit a monster more subjectively, right close into him, rather than as a terror that is terrorizing other people. I wanted to place the reader right intimately in with him. And uh he's hungry, right? So that's the whole nexus of this book being about eating and consumption, is that he is very hungry for, I guess in some regards you could say people, but also for stories and emotion. And his attachment to Nev is one that's less about really eating her body and more about eating her soul, her wholeness, like her personality, her heart. And that relationship, which is, and she's kind of happy to give it to him in portions, right? Her relationship with him is a little touch and go on her side because she's actually the one who has a bit more power in their dynamic than you think. She's the person who can get up and walk around, whereas baby just grows and grows under the surface of things. So there is a little bit of push and pull between them. But when Shell kind of arrives into things, Shell is kind of has just come out of a very boring relationship ending. So not all separations or breakups are kind of deeply theatrical. Both Nev's breakup and Shell's breakup are both very kind of ordinary, which I think is a more common experience for people in their 30s than not, where it's just kind of sometimes things are just over, and that's actually more common really than the great opera of finding your partner in bed with somebody else, do you know? So Shell is kind of, she's all over the place, really. She's a mess. And Nev is a very sturdy, strong, seemingly strong individual who she can kind of take orders from, even though Nev herself is taking orders. So the three of them are caught in this situation, which is really more about power than it is anything else. It's obviously about sex, but arguably sex and power are kind of the same thing, really, aren't they? So Shell makes some pretty poor decisions as the story goes on, as does Nev. But I think Shell's choices are pretty poor too. Um, and Baby realizes very early on that he can use Shell to get what he really wants from Nev. So yeah, it's a mess. It's a very tricky game of chess. The three of them are somehow playing. The three people
Yes.
don't belong on that board, but there they are.
Well, I like that Baby is a main narrator of the story
Mm.
also.
Mhm.
Like Baby's really the driving force.
Mhm.
And I felt just, I mean, obviously Little Shop is fun, and I mean, is it wrong to say there's like, it's got some inspiration from there, or is that
Oh,
just
it certainly does.
assuming?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think I think with Little Shop, there are two things that this book has in common with Little Shop. One is that there's a talking pond, and the other is that both stories are absolutely and inextricably about poverty and about class. When I have, revisited various iterations of Little Shop in the process of writing, I wrote crucial detail is that I wrote Eat the Ones You Love in 2020. So there was an original draft of this novel that was set during the pandemic. So a lot of that energy is there. And I revisited Little Shop. I saw it off Broadway. I went back and watched the black and white one. I watched the alternate Frank Oz ending, which got tanked. I've gone far down the annals and explored the tone and the feel of what was being done with that story. And what I could never take my eyes off was how badly Seymour wanted to be anywhere else but Skid Row and Audrey. That what poverty does to a person is it can completely destroy your moral compass if you let it. And it can also um like ambition can do that to you too. And all of these are different forms of hunger, right? So as somebody from a working class background myself, I relate very strongly to the lengths that you will go to change your background, to change your foreground, to change where you're going. And I think with all of the silliness and camp, the delightful camp, and the great caricatures of in the movie Steve Martin and Ellen Green, and like there's so much, and like the great terrible puppet of Audrey too. I think there's a lot of really wonderful obfuscation around what this story is really about. And I also I needed to explore that myself and Eat the Ones You Love too, because Shell's relationship that she was in prior to the beginning of the story was real comfy, real upper middle class. Like if she had gone ahead, pulled the trigger, married Gav, and gone on to live a soft, cushy life, she would have been fine. But she fucks it all in to go back and live at home with her parents and work in a shop. And that's a economic risk as well as a personal one. Um, so I guess saying eat the ones you love is about money sounds really silly, but it is.
Well, I mean, and also you have Nev and
Yeah.
Jen, who came from the States, who's a
Jen. Yeah.
doctor who came from
Yeah.
the
Jen who's
States.
fancy.
Yes. And that ended.
Yeah.
And you just sort of have these two women and a carnivorous plant in this dance together. And, while the plant is sort of spreading into this space, and it really does. I mean, it does really work for, I suppose, an allegory on hunger and
Mm.
poverty and consumption, not both like eating consumption, but just consumption of goods.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is just a fun story, and it was interesting just watching it sort of pan out. There are different parts to it also. Um, so like how much did it change though over the time, like from the first iteration to now?
Jen came last. So Jen is Nev's ex-girlfriend who the first time we meet her is during their breakup. Um, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that she has a really fun tattoo, and I think her fun tattoo is maybe my favorite part of the whole novel. She has a Jolene, 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 Jolene tattooed around her leg.
I love
So
it so much.
in
I
case
know, I know, I know,
in
I
case
know.
listeners weren't sold, there is a fun tattoo. There's a little spoiler. But yeah, Jen is a benevolent American who was sort of coaxed into Nev's life. And their breakup is pretty catastrophic. So her story, which is told in an epistolatory kind of fashion via emails, and then that it breaks into a more thorough third person perspective as opposed to Baby's first person. That came last. I guess it's not a spoiler to say that in the original story, Jen died, and also so did pretty much everyone else. There was an ending not unlike Little Shop, which was much more damning and much less hopeful. And it was the one in which Baby won and everyone else got stung really bad. And that was, I think, as a person who, a part of what I try to do when I'm writing is explore grayness and liminality and things that don't belong anywhere, which makes me a fantastically easy sell, as you can tell. But I'm really compelled by things that don't fit because I myself am a person who doesn't fit really many places. And something that I can end up doing in my first drafts is making things a bit hopeless. So the story originally was kind of a bummer. And part of the journey that it went on was becoming hopeful. I will say that everyone in the story gets exactly what they deserve and no one ends up alone. But it definitely isn't as damned as it was on the first pass. It changed so much because I changed so much. I wrote it, I began to write that book in 2020 and I finished my edits on it last year. So I don't think you can turn any manuscript over in your hands that many times without it finding a ring of truth along the way and what it needs to be.
Thank you so much. I really do think that this is a great book. It's a lot of
Thank
fun.
you.
You could if you don't feel like being that deep about it, you could just enjoy a fun book about a love story between two women and the plant that wants to eat one of them. Otherwise, there really is a lot to say about it. That's very interesting that you had like your own original ending, your own
Yeah.
original Frank Oz ending.
Hmm.
But really, thank you so much. Eat the Ones You Love is awesome. Are we going to see more of this pantheon from
Yes.
your writing? Yay.
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yeah. They're siblings, all these monsters. And I thought in the work that I was producing that I was done with them until they started showing up again. I think Stephen King says something really interesting about the origin of the word haunting, which is that a haunt is a place that animals go to feed. And if I could stop thinking about that, I would, but I don't think I can. So yes, there'll be definitely more hungry monsters in future.
Well, thank you so much. This was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. Our guest was,
Sarah Maria Griffin.
and check out Eat the Ones You Love. It is awesome. We are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.